Joel Beall is, to say the least, a talented writer and a communicator in this game of golf. And his new book is called Playing Dirty: Rediscovering Golf's Soul in Scotland in an Age of Sports Washing and Civil War. And Joel, whenever I suggest, I mean, just like hint at the possibility that there's sports washing connected to live golf, I get my head chewed off in the world of Twitter trolls. So I can only imagine what the early feedback's been about the book. So we'll dig into all that. How are you, first of all? It's good
Doing
to see you.
good, Bill. How about yourself?
Doing well, waiting for the official start of spring, which would be weather above 40 degrees for more than 3 consecutive days here in my part of the world. Um, okay, so as I read through this book, my best summary is my summary. You tell me if I'm close to accurate. It felt like Joel Beall went to Scotland to really get back his love and appreciation for the game that has been diluted and tainted by this disastrous world of men's professional golf, really thanks to the onset of LIV and then the greed that has come out on both sides. So it kind of felt like you went over there to be reminded, oh yeah, that's why people love this game, and for generations, it has really just been infused into their blood. Am I anywhere close?
Yeah, I think you're on the right path. I think at least for me, when we talk about professional golf, we just talk about golf in general, right? There's no real delineation between what the pros do, what the amateurs do, how we talk about it. And because of the schism at the top level, and because of all this animosity, because the self entitlement, it seemed like it was really weighing down the entire game. So when I'm trying to describe to friends of, hey, here's kind of the cost or what's being suffered because of it. It's funny. I didn't want to do a Scotland book because there've been so many people who've gone over to try to find themselves, and understandably, it's such a special place. That I actually initially didn't want to do that, but as I had more conversations with the people and trying to describe, here's what's at stake, here's what's vulnerable. I kept coming back to Scotland, and to me, I think the best way to contrast how ridiculous what's been going on the past 4 years at the top level is to show how pure things are in Scotland. So for me, it was actually a nice framing of here's why this stuff is here's why this stuff is bad at the top level, and here's what's good. And I hopefully felt that framing really put both worlds in a better light. And yeah, that's kind of the genesis behind the concept.
Yeah, to the uninitiated, those who haven't yet picked up Playing Dirty, it's got such a unique rhythm to it because there will be a half a page about a unique character that you encountered at an off the beaten path course in Scotland, and then all of a sudden the next paragraph will jump me back into the lunacy of LIV and the disingenuousness of all that is wrapped around that. So, were you kind of fighting that personal struggle even while you were in Scotland, or is that just how you decided to tell the story, kind of a quick back and forth throughout?
A little bit of both. I certainly didn't go in to the writing process and pitching process with that in mind. But to me, as I was kind of mapping everything out, it felt like, man, this is just the best way to lay everything out for the reader to really highlight why Scotland is so pure and how bad things have gotten at the top level. And yeah, my editor at Golf Digest, Sam Wyman, he's very big on showing rather than telling, and I felt by having just a really a focus on these people a lot. We know for the most part, we know what's going on at the top level. I try to give you a little bit more behind the scenes of what's going on, some opinion with reporting. But to me, to really crystallize it, I wanted to focus on these towns and courses and people that to me represent the best of the game. And hopefully by that we can, we as golf fans can have a better faith and conviction and that this game will continue to go forward with whatever happens at the top level. And also to again accentuate that all these things we talk about with the PGA Tour and Live, this is not the way it has to be. There's another way of being over there. And hopefully by showing that, people can realize we shouldn't get too tied up in what's going on at this fight at the top level, because there still is a lot of great in this game. We just have to know where to look for it.
Well, I'm glad you said that, and it reminds me that even while overall television ratings have dipped considerably for the PGA Tour and for LIV, they're non-existent, so it doesn't really matter. But even while that has happened, passion for and participation in the game has skyrocketed. I mean, COVID being part of that, but so has the kind of the disillusionment and disconnection from wanting to sit down and watch a game that has been so watered down, to say the least. And when our audience hears this conversation, I would guess that for the most part, 95% of our audience thinks of golf in Scotland as just going to the old course. That's what we think of. We're St. Andrews kind of centric. And yet you discovered so many, just like these guys should be characters in sitcoms worlds, at courses that we probably have not heard of before. When you think back to your time there, and you can let us know how long it was, when you think back to your time there, who's the who's the first image in your mental Rolodex that pops into mind? And what stories did you take from that?
So the first, it's I would say more of a place that came just because there are so many people attached to it, and that's a small little place called Caradale, which is way off the beaten path. It's for those who've read Michael Bamberger's To the Links Land, which to me is the seminal work in golf period, let alone about golf in Scotland. He talks about his love of Machrihanish. Just to give people an idea, Caradale is about 45 minutes north of Machrihanish in a town of about 500 people. It's a small little 9-hole course, and to me, it's just if you would have described it to me, I would have told you that this isn't real. It's a little, gosh, imagine a snack stand is essentially the clubhouse. The first hole is 180-yard par three uphill that you don't know if you need to hit driver or 7-iron. It's a really mess with the eyes. And then you go up to the top of this hill, and then you just feel like the whole world is underneath you.
Mm.
You kind of see the rest of the course. There's water. There's the other side of Scotland, and it's all maintained by just one person. It's a staff of one. And I was lucky enough to talk to the superintendent there. And I'm going to say the name because I want people to discover him, not only who he is, but his story. He's got a beautiful but tragic backstory as well. And basically, this community that comes around this course is just wonderful, and it's something that for $10 you can play this course all day. And you just think, my gosh, like if this was in America, you'd charge 200 and $300 to play this. And here it's just, yeah, it's an honesty box. There's a lot of times someone won't even be in the clubhouse. Just we trust you.
Mm.
And yeah, Caradale is what definitely jumps out. Same time, Brora is a very special place to me. It's I think everyone knows rural Dornoch, but it's about 20 minutes away from Dornoch, hour away from Inverness. Brora's definitely gained some esteem in the past couple years. I think, especially with the advent of the YouTubers going on, I think that's been so great for Scotland. People getting able to see the visuals of it. But to me, Brora really stood out because this was a course that the Scottish love, for the most part, Americans don't really know except the zealous. But because it's so remote, it's in the Highlands. It's always kind of teeter around financial instability, and it really got hit hard at the onset of the pandemic, and to the point where they thought they might have to shut the course down. And we cover that in one chapter, contrasting how the PGA Tour was able to kind of survive and showing how this course was able, I mean, not only to pick itself up by its bootstraps, but by the support of so many people around the world, including in America. This course was not only able to survive, but now is in a better financial spot than ever before. And just the love and passion around, like the people around it who kind of kept it going, people who stopped what they were doing to come volunteer. Scotland had a lot more stringent rules at the onset of COVID to the point where guys couldn't go to work. That included the maintenance staff.
Mm.
So, as you can imagine, people, we've seen what happens to courses, even just a couple weeks of letting them go. It can be hard to even get them back. And so, the police had told Brora, listen, we don't know, we understand you can't have anybody there, but like this is unfortunately the rules. We're trying to keep everybody safe. And so, one guy's like, well, I guess I'll just sneak out to volunteer to make sure the course is there. And he shows up, and basically 20 people from town, including someone on the police force, was there to help, get the course. So, we, to me, what part of the inspiration of the book too, and Bror really encapsulate this is that these courses, in America, golf has this stigma of definitely to the elite, right? Or you have to have money. And Scotland's the opposite, extremely democratic. Anybody can play. There's no real price entry. But more importantly, these courses are the town halls of these small towns. And to see all the good, we always hear the nonsense about growing the game and how golf can be good for the community. Scotland actually lives it, and they don't even have a saying for it because that's just how things are. It's inherent in their nature. So with Brewer and Caradell, hopefully that kind of crystallizes. Hey, here's how these courses really do serve the community and not just themselves.
I love the story when you were unfolding it about the golf world coming to the rescue. And when I say the golf world, I mean the entire golf world. People who have never and will never set foot on that golf course were sending donations in. And it was kind of a all hands on deck effort to preserve a piece of history.
Hmm.
And that rich history runs everywhere through Scotland, right? I remember being over several years ago, and I cannot remember which place it was, but in one of the clubhouses, they just had sitting out on a table, like the ledger book or the comment book from guests and from members from like 200 years ago.
Mm.
And I kept thinking, man, if somebody spilled a drink on this, it would be ruined. Why isn't this under glass or why isn't it, laminated or something? No, because they were still making entries in it. And I still remember one problem. This was like from 1880 something. It says on the left side, problem. Club is running low on whiskey. Solution. Club purchased more whiskey. I was like, I'm glad we wrote that down. We preserved that for all time. And yet, as you said, this is the DNA. This isn't some optional trend that they're trying to work their way through. And so, as these really compelling stories unfold in the book Playing Dirty, bam, the next paragraph takes me to the the jarring, caustic, cynical, dishonest world of men's professional golf. I'm going to read an excerpt from your book. The most problematic aspect of live golf from a competitive standpoint has been its pervasive sense of unearned entitlement. Live defectors seemed oblivious to the fact that their massive paydays came with conditions, instead believing they deserved their windfall despite modest career achievements. That is so well said. I've been trying to get to that point in the various things that I've said, but you're a better writer. And that sort of statement also, for some reason, lights on fire people who don't play professional golf. They're fans of it. And for some reason, they take great exception to that. Why do you think that golf fans, I understand why players would take exception to that if they're on live and they went through all that decision making. Why do you think the average golf fan gets so lit up about criticism of live golf?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to remember. One, I think most golf fans, and if you look at the surveys that have been done, most golf fans do think live has been detrimental to the game. Those who are getting upset, I think we have to realize one, as we kind of cover in the book, there is a large set of artificial voices that are involved in the echo chambers. We sometimes we look at Twitter and we look at Instagram and even Facebook. That's not real life. Like there's some keyboard warriors out there that can either speak for a very vocal minority or a contingent that doesn't exist at all. I think there's some bad faith actors who are just looking to start up trouble, who are just looking for a fight. Obviously, right now, the last decade or so, the culture is not exactly favorable to media. So I think anything a media pushes out, there's going to be a pushback against it.
Fair.
I also think though, you can't be totally dismissive. I think there's, the tour. Part of the reason live, or not even live, but the reason a rival tour was interesting in the first part was I think people had grown a little tired of the tour stasis, right? And so I think some people who do back live don't back it necessarily because they like it. They just don't like the tour that much. And so because of that, they've kind of drawn their lines. And like with any sports team, if that's your side, you're gonna stick to it no matter what. So in that part, I kind of understand, but it's been interesting that yeah, when I see that pushback, I've yet to hear a reason why they defend that lack of meritocracy. They just get upset when you point it out, but they've yet to provide an argument of why they think that should be so.
Yeah, and everybody throws up this phrase. They say everybody has a price. You would do the same thing, and you address that directly in the book. You say everyone has a price echoes through golf's civil war like a cynical mantra, gaining resonance whenever another star like Koepka or Rahm performs their inevitable about face on live. These reversals, from principled resistance to lucrative surrender, are often met with knowing nods and whispers of "told you so." Uh, Joel, not everybody has a price,
Yep.
as evidenced by the fact that not everybody left.
Exactly. It's let's be clear. A lot of people have left for live, right? From basically the onset to 2023, somewhere between 22 of the top 100 players went. That's a decent chunk. That's also a very large amount of people who didn't go, and I can tell you almost all those guys received similar offers. So by strictly numbers game, you can say you're right. It's not not everyone has a price. But I also just think it's a really cynical way to view the world. To think people are willing to, just because a few people are willing to adjust their morals or compromise their morals for a price, doesn't mean everybody will. And that if even if I'm not obtuse to the fact that, listen, money is very important, especially our American society. But people who have families, people who have certain constraints. I get that. That just doesn't apply to everybody, and to some people, principle stands a lot more than price, and that's the kind of why I just shake my head of, just because a few people cave in doesn't speak for the whole group.
Yeah, I was in a bit of a Twitter or X back and forth just last night with a friend of mine who, for some reason, at the conclusion of the TGL championships, was all lit up about how this is no different than live golf. And I shared with him some of the differences in the sources of the money and things like that. And he got quite worked up about the whole thing. And I was like, listen, I'm still your friend either way. I'm just telling you these are not the same things. I don't think that the funding sources for TGL ever dismembered a journalist. If they have, they've really done a great job of keeping it quiet. And I haven't heard anything from that journalist's family. And then he did not see it that way, to say the very least. Then there's also the excuse from the players who left. It's a business decision for my family. I love how you point out the fact that this would necessarily require us to believe that their families were on hard times. That this was a guy who was driving for DoorDash in between trying to qualify for events, when in reality, John Rahm and Dustin and most of the others, Phil, they were doing okay. They were able to kind of pay the kids' braces bill from the orthodontist.
Yeah, a lot of these guys already had generational wealth, and I think to me, what's even more insulting on that, I'm doing it for my family, is essentially using your family as a shield to defend this decision that overlooks that the source of this money is terrorizing thousands, if not millions, of other families. So just because maybe your family is taking advantage of this, so what's that say? Just because you can play golf pretty well, like that makes it okay that this funding is legitimately ruining lives and tearing families apart. And that just ignorance. That's one of the few points that really stirs me up. Because that's the crux of this, right? Is that it's not necessarily that these guys have taking the money, it's where the money comes from, and they've kind of abandoned everything to take that money. So people have always asked, are you a Tour loyalist? And it's no, not at all. As the book examines, there's plenty of criticism at the Tour as well. To me, it's where the money is coming from, and what's the money mean? It's that these players kind of fail to see that they're puppets for this really dark thing, that either they don't want to be held accountable to it, or they are trying to have these mental gymnastics to convince themselves they're not part of this propaganda.
As we sit here today with his somewhat ostracized position, you think Greg Norman puts his head on the pillow at night and thinks, I did a pretty darn good job. I got what I wanted. Or do you think he has any second thoughts about the way it has gone down?
It's a good question. The problem with Greg Norman is that this was all personal vendetta, right? This is a guy who's been trying to take down the PGA Tour for 30 years. So for him, this is really no different from what he tried in the mid 90s, starting his World Golf Tour with Rupert Murdoch and Fox Sports. The only real difference is he's found a government to fund to fund that crusade. Um, yeah, I. It's funny, a lot of live guys actually will defend Norman, not because they necessarily like him, but because he's actually kind of given them a blanket because they know as long as he was there that he would get most of the most of the fire. Um, and yeah, I mean he succeeded in it, right? He got his tour up. At what cost? You know, this is the guy who was already sort of pushed out from most of the establishment. You know, you read you can the stories about him burning bridges are legendary, and now I mean he's essentially solidified that. You know, so you know he got his tour up, but now he's been essentially pushed out of that as well as they try to possibly forge a way back with the PGA Tour. And I just he's still yet to provide a reason why he wanted this rather than just trying to line his pockets and take down the tour. You know, I get the whole. The other point that always makes me roll my eyes is, well, we want to make this an international game.
Right.
That's I totally understand that. I think it's a viable and worthwhile endeavor. The problem is, if that's the case, why are still most of your events in America on Live? And it totally disregards what the DP World Tour has done. That's the global tour. I mean, that goes to 25, 26 different countries. If we really wanted to beef up that part, we should be putting more resources to getting the DP circuit up and running. Because that's that's another tour that unfortunately has had its financial missteps and troubles over the past decade or so. But yeah, it's such an insult anytime I say, well, we're trying to be the global tour. It's well, no, you're not. No, you're
Right.
not. So, yeah, at the end of the day, if you really try to take away words and actions, it's hard to see Norman's pursuit of anything but of just trying to take down this vengeance against the tour, and it was a very narrow focus without really worrying about the consequences.
Well, and then once you put a pencil to the business side of Live Golf, obviously the Saudis can keep writing checks as long as they feel like it until they are no longer able to sell oil, they'll be just fine. What do you think comes first? A coming together, a reunion of sorts, so that Live defectors are somehow in some pathway welcomed back to the PGA Tour? Because one would think that now that they've grabbed their bag of family money, that they would love to play for something that matters. So, what do you think comes first? That reunification or the Saudis pull the plug on a financial disaster from just a ledger standpoint?
Good question. I think ultimately you'll see reunification before that. Obviously, it's been reported that PIF has this mandate to stop spending on, cut the spending back on certain areas. From a fan standpoint, you would certainly think blowing $4 to $5 billion on this league that no one's watching is a colossal disaster. But that kind of goes into the sports washing aspects, right? It's
Yeah.
yeah, as a sports league in itself, it's bad, but Live was never meant to be solely about entertainment. It was about facilitating connections. I think when you mentioned sports washing earlier, we tend to think of that, at least in the American sense, of trying to hey, we're trying to hide these awful things we've been accused of. On that sense, Liv's been a total failure because I think a lot of people in America, at least a lot of American sports fans, are now more informed of what goes on in Saudi Arabia than they did before. So in that sense, not great. However, I think we can say it's been a success normalizing because I think even saw this at when the June 6th framework agreement came out 2 years ago. People were already just so worn down and tired about sports washing and this greed and entitlement, and they were kind of upset with both sides. People just wanted to get this over with,
Yeah.
which I totally understood, and part of me kind of agrees with. But then you wonder, all right, we're getting this done at what cost though? What is being surrendered by this? And that's part of what sports watching is. It kind of beats you down until you're numb and you just are apathetic about it. The other thing is, it's the reason they pick golf as one of these endeavors is to facilitate really important relationships with people in government and people in power. And my gosh, on that front, spending $5 billion to get access to the White House, that's actually a bargain. You could argue. Obviously, they Live partnered before they even had anybody signed to the roster, at least publicly signed to the roster. Live announced they had partnered with President or Donald Trump, who at the time was a former president, at a time when the rest of the golf establishment had sort of torn its back from Trump. The PGA of America the year before had taken away its PGA championship from Trump Bedminster. The tour had already severed ties 7, 8 years ago. The R&A, which everyone had believed would be going back to Turnberry, had took the Turk Turnberry off its rota, specifically saying we will not return until the focus will be on the championship and not on the owner. Liv gave this guy, or I should say, Piff gave this guy a lifeline, not because they necessarily saw the merit in his portfolio of courses. They saw what this guy could do. They took a bet on him, thinking there's a chance he gets back in power, and if he does, he's going to remember who was there by his side when he was at his low point. And obviously, that's coming to fruition. President Trump, and we've seen that now with he's having a part in these negotiations, and a lot of people are wondering why is the president of the United States involved in a negotiations like this, and it's strictly because both sides want him to, but honestly, Piff wants him to. So on that front, I mean, it's people always go back to the 1936 Summer Olympics with Nazi Germany as the prime example of sports washing. I think what we've seen with Liv and Piff and its relationship with Trump is actually right there with it.
And we've had Olympics in China and in Russia, and the entire world was invited to come and see how pristine and loving and welcoming these very hostile nations are. And so there are many examples of it all. Interestingly, when they had the Oval Office meeting just a few weeks ago, uh, no deal came out of it, right? So I'm trying to remind people, by the way, from time to time, that for the players who left to be welcomed back into the PGA Tour would also require some sort of permission slip from the current PGA Tour players, right? I mean, they own their tour, at least in wink wink fashion. Yeah, I think they've forgotten that Monahan works for them, but that's another story altogether. But it was interesting to me that all the powers that be got together in the same room, and the expectation was, for better or for worse, here comes the announcement of a deal. That didn't happen. So I don't know what those other obstacles are, and if that will be something that resolves. But at least right now, my conjecture is, and I don't cover the tour nearly to the degree that you do. My conjecture is that the current players are saying, I don't think so. At least not until we figure out how to claw back some of the dollars we didn't go and get. Right. So is that the crux of the matter? Is that the players who didn't defect want some of that money returned, which is never going to happen. So is that where
So
we are?
we reported about the meeting on golfdigest.com about 3 weeks ago. It's a lot more nuanced than that, and it's actually to a point I wouldn't call it stalemate. I think both sides still think a deal could be had, but a lot of folks went to the White House, and both sides kind of let leak that we think a deal is going to be announced later that day. And instead, what happened was I think both sides came thinking they had all the cards, and it's been really interesting with the Trump side. Now we kind of have the last 4 years we've had what's the tour saying, what's Liv saying. You have agents and players. You have to try to figure out where the truth is. Now we have this third party, and as you're hearing this, you have to keep in mind that everyone's truth is a little bit different. Everyone has an agenda they're trying to push. Now you have this Trump side, so you now have this third side coming in, and it's pretty apparent what happened is that Liv really want or Piff really wants the team aspect to continue under some form, and at the moment that is just a non-starter for the PGA Tour. They sort of think, well, this would hurt our current product. Obviously they still want the Piff money. They want 5 to 7 Live players back. I think we can say with confidence three, and that would be Rahm, Brooks Koepka, and Bryson DeChambeau. After that, you start kind of, the names gets really light, but they're kind of looking at this as, take Rahm away from this. I'm saying the tour is looking at this as take Rahm away. They really Liv hasn't signed any stars since 2022. The ratings are non-existent. The money's starting to get cut off. Why exactly? This isn't two sides coming together. This is, what exactly are you bringing to the table aside from a couple players and obviously a lot of money? Meanwhile, Piff really hasn't made any concessions either. At least the tour side says, listen, they've asked for certain things, we've acquiesced. They haven't done anything for us. So what are they going to do? Um, you know, on the Piff side, yes, I think they're definitely feeling the pressure to make a deal, but they also do, as we mentioned before, have this endless runway of money still at their disposal. Yes, it might be getting cut back, but I can also see that side being galvanized because this is not a side accustomed to losing. They get what they want. So if they're gonna get turned away again, there's still that threat of, all right, you guys don't want to do this, we can go maybe partner with the DP World Tour. Maybe we'll go ahead and inject more money. Maybe these players who yes haven't come yet now see that their own tour has tried to make a deal. So what's going to stop them from making a deal separately? So it's still in this game of chicken at the moment, as someone referred to me. And then at the same time, you have President Trump's side, who he's not. I think we can say not doing this out of the goodwill of his heart. He has a stake in this. He is a part of LIV. Are his events going to get back on tour? What can these sides help possibly do to help get a major championship back to one of his properties, which has been his stated goal with his golf ventures for a decade now. So you have all these sides trying to kind of get what they want, and no one's really at the moment willing to kind of come to the other side. I don't want to say that. I think the tour has done a lot to try to come closer to the middle, but at this point, PIF hasn't really done that. So, I think it is worth saying that when deals come close to fruition, there's always a little bit of cold feet. But I mean, as this drags on now, gosh, we're about to hit the Masters and it's been pretty quiet. So I would be surprised if we hear a deal coming to fruition in the next couple of months. And yeah, what that says about the future. I mean, this thing, I think there was a sense that, as you mentioned, no matter for better or for worse, this thing could be over. I don't think this thing's looking like it's going to be over anytime soon.
Mm. Aside from access to the majors based on prior accomplishments and world rank points, I don't necessarily think that DeChambeau and DJ and the others and Rahm are all that upset about not being able to play in Milwaukee or in Detroit or in Texas or whatever, the normal tour schedule.
I would push back a little bit on that. I think Rom does. I think out of all the guys, I think Rom does miss the competition.
Hmm.
I think we still haven't got his full story. I mean, this is a guy who, for 2 years, said it's not about the money for me. I will never sell. It's I play for this. So for him to turn about, we still haven't got the full reason why exactly. Now, I think there has been a lot of rumblings from Rom's camp that this was a guy who when he left was right there with Scheffler as number one in the world. He had just won the Masters. He had won 4 times. He felt, and I think there's a little bit of truth to this, that he wasn't given the star status that others received, especially others who had not achieved as much. So I think there was a little bit of, if I'm never going to get my due here, it will this LIV platform allow me to kind of be the star I think I am. But yeah, for a guy who can say it's not about the money, not about the money, and then to say, well, when you see the check in front of you, it's a little different. Like, I guess, but you just said money doesn't mean to you. So I think he's the one guy who does, if not regret, misses the actual competition of the week to week. And he said this last year, right? He misses going to Torrey Pines. He misses going
True.
to some of the events he's played in. I think Bryson, in his quest for fame, has realized, the YouTube channel only gets him so far. I think he misses the competition. I think Brooks Koepka as well, as he has mentioned in the past too at the 23 Masters, right? If he said if I was fully healthy, I don't know if I would have made that decision, which was a hell of a concession. I'm sure his bosses weren't uh excited to hear about that, but um outside of that though, yeah, I don't know. Like I can honestly see Dustin Johnson saying, I'm good, I'm retired, I have my
Sure.
money.
Yeah.
I think there are certain guys who would I think fans would be surprised to decide, what, I think I'm good. But yeah, I just wanted to point out, I do think a couple players actually do want to come back, and you might see that if there is no deal and their personal contracts with LIV are going to expire here coming up shortly. Is there a coming, a hat in hand to the moment of the tour of, I'm sorry, what can I do to get back? I'm not saying it's going to be everybody, but I do think you'll see a couple guys try to make peace and serve their punishment any way possible to get back.
Yeah, and I appreciate you pointing that out. You're absolutely right. And I'm a huge John Rahm fan. It really made me sad when he so directly contradicted himself and took this leap. I would guess that a lot of that decision for him and the others was also based on some very hollow and false promises from Greg Norman about, oh no, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You're going to come play this schedule, and you can pick and choose. The used car salesman in Greg Norman is still running quite strong.
I
because
throw
I
Phil
think,
Mickelson in there too, as well. He's got a lot of ties with Phil. Obviously, Phil's brother was his college coach and his agent. They
yeah.
still share an agency. Um, there's the Scottsdale ties there. Yeah, I think that was a big part of it as well.
Well, that leads me to one of my final questions for you, and that is, this is like a 36,000 foot question. Do you think all of Live and its attraction to Rom and Kepka and DJ and Bryson, do you think any of that happens if Phil hadn't been deeply indebted to gamblers and needed a large payday, which is part of why he would have taken this risk and then been the evangelist to win over these other few big names that went? Does any of this happen if Phil's not in trouble?
Good. It's a good question. But yeah, I think it does, right? Because the Live framework was actually started by somebody else. It was started by Andy Gardner with his Premier Golf League.
Yeah.
And this was, there are there were 48 guys who initially jumped. So obviously Phil wasn't the only guy. And honestly, to me, the guy who really solidified the viability of Liv was actually Dustin Johnson, because Phil at this point was 50, right? He
Yeah.
had as great as Kiwa was. What made it great is that this guy had beat Father Time, but no one was, I don't think any rational person was thinking this guy still had another 10-year career ahead of him.
Hmm.
um, and so even if Phil would have gone, and you see Sergio and you see the Poulters and Westwood, these were mostly guys who were in their 40s and were well past their primes. DJ was the first guy who really went, oh man, this is a real player that we think still has some life left in him. Um, but yeah, trust me, I've thought the same thing about Phil. I think certainly his name power and star power gave it the initial validity in the months leading up. I mean, he also almost single-handedly took it down, right, with his
Right.
comments to Alan Shipnuck.
Right.
Um, so yeah, it's certainly interesting, especially as the book talks about. This was not the only league Phil was attached to. He was part of this Silver Lake pitch to the PGA Tour separately in 2021, about a fall aspect that would compensate the marquee players. But yeah, it's for as much deserve it criticism as Phil's got. This runs so much bigger than him. To me, he's just kind of a front man, and a pretty poorly disguised one at that.
Yeah, and man, what a tarnishing of a legacy. I mean, the guy was as popular as Arnold was at
Yep.
the time of this whole thing, and it's a shame. It would be a fascinating exploration to find out the real why, the real why that he did all this. You and I have spent the better part of 20 plus minutes just talking about the mess between the tour and live, which is kind of why you wrote a book called Playing Dirty: Rediscovering Golf Soul in Scotland in an age of sports washing and civil war. It's only fitting for us to wrap up our time to have you leave us with a feel good Scotland moment. Take us back to the roots of the game and the parts of it that warmed your heart and renewed your love for it. You're a journalist. You're enmeshed in this cynical world of what's happening at the pro level. Deep breath. What brought you back when you were in Scotland?
Man, the first thing that comes to mind is actually the one of my first moments. The first 2 weeks I was there, I was in St. Andrews, and every day my dog and I would go down, take a walk, kind of sit by the 18th green, watch people coming off, going off. And if folks have not been to the old course, people just hover around the 18th hole, watching people come in, and they cheered for you. But on Sundays, the course is closed, and it turns into this park, and it's incredible. Imagine walking your dog on Augusta National on Sunday,
I know.
people playing frisbee, people having picnics on greens. That's what's going on, and to me, it really goes back to over there. It's a way of life, and the course isn't some money maker. It's because, I mean, gosh, how much money are they leaving on the table by keeping the course closed on a Sunday? But to them, it doesn't matter. It's more of how do we best serve the town, and there's this huge green space. Let's give it back to the people. Let's let people enjoy it. There's a lot of people who, either aren't good at golf, don't aren't, but they enjoy the scenery, they enjoy the topography. It's such a beautiful area over there. And just giving this sacred piece of land back to the people for a day is that's something that really sticks with me. The other thing that really always sticks out is just as we've talked about, there's been so much fracture, and not only between tours, between friendships at the tour level, between fans. And in Scotland, there's such this fraternal love with people you've just met, with your best friends. Everyone just gets along. I think everyone's talking on the same wavelength. And to me, I always go back to the scene at North Berwick, where that's one of my favorite courses in the world. I think it's the best course in the world, period. But I stayed in North Berwick for a week, and by the 18th green, there's just golf's very you get done with it around here, you shake hands, maybe trade some jokes. Over there, everyone was trading hugs. I think everyone was they were very aware of where they were at and how special it was. And to kind of see this camaraderie and some of the kids people had just met and still sharing these hugs and this feeling of goodwill, it really gave me hope that, man, whatever nonsense is going on right now, it's hopefully, it could be another couple months, it could be another couple years. It still will be a period of time. There's something about Scotland that's timeless and it's forever. And that's kind of what I came away with thinking of. No matter how long the storm will last, it eventually will pass. And Scotland and golf and real golf will still be there.
Love that. What a great conclusion to both the book and our conversation. Joel, thank you for taking us inside your journey. We know the story's not fully written yet, but that's fine. The part about rediscovering the purity of the game and your passion for it, what an awesome project. And next time you do this, let me know. I can come along.
Bring
Thanks
it
so
along.
much. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Bill, thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.